Torches flickered in the corridors of the Escorial, their smoke curling into shadows that pressed on the stone like a suffocating veil. The air was heavy, as though history itself had grown tired of bearing the weight of one man's reign. On the bed lay Ferdinand VII, King of Spain, a body broken by disease, paranoia, and a lifetime of humiliations. Outside, servants whispered, their voices laced with dread. Few kings inspired such unease in death, not for triumphs left behind, but for the scars carved upon his kingdom. Spain had once stretched across oceans, feared in every court of Europe. Under Ferdinand, that dominion shrank into ruin, colonies lost, people starved, and the palace reduced to a theater of suspicion. From the start, whispers clung to him. Born in El Escorial on October 14, 1784, son of Charles IV and Maria Luisa of Parma, he carried centuries of dynastic entanglements. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, a legacy of decay masked by the golden veneer of Catholic majesty. The Habsburg jaw and Bourbon arrogance coursed in his blood, but so too did weakness. It was said he entered the world already marked by misfortune, destined not for wisdom, but to smother his land beneath fear. Some swore his deformities were visible from birth, though historians dismiss this as palace gossip. What cannot be denied is that he grew into a man whose insecurities became weapons, his private anguish bleeding into the lives of millions. His childhood was an education in humiliation. His father, Charles IV, was weak-willed, more hunter than king, leaving governance to Manuel de Godoy, the queen's favorite and likely her lover. Ferdinand watched as his mother's scandals tainted the court, foreign ambassadors carrying mocking tales across Europe. For a boy meant to inherit an empire, the lesson was cruel. Power could be stolen, mocked, betrayed. From these years sprouted the roots of his paranoia, and perhaps the cruelty that later defined him. He learned to mask bitterness behind obedience, to feign loyalty while plotting revenge. Rumors about his awkward form and uneasy presence scarred his soul, scars that hardened into tyranny. The court of Madrid was no place of innocence. It was a hall of mirrors where power lived and died in whispers. Ferdinand grew up hearing laughter he imagined aimed at him, servants giggling behind doors, courtiers smirking at his clumsy mannerisms. Whether real or imagined mattered little. He believed them. His tutors noted a boy secretive, resentful, quick to anger. When mocked, he lashed out, punishing even small slights with cruelty. Gossip claimed that as a teenager he had a page flogged and exiled for entering his chamber at the wrong moment. Historians doubt the severity, but the truth is clear. Ferdinand learned early that fear protected him from shame. By the time he came of age, Spain was already rotting. The Bourbon monarchy had lost its grandeur, the treasury drained by endless wars, the streets of Madrid filled with beggars. Charles IV's court was dominated by Godoy, the hated favorite who became corruption's symbol. The nobles, desperate for change, turned to Ferdinand. They saw not greatness, but a weapon to unseat Godoy. He became their tool, their rallying point. They called him El Deseado, the desired one. The name echoed in taverns and conspiracies, but the irony was bitter. Ferdinand would prove desired only until revealed, and then despised. Even then his nature betrayed him. Behind princely grace hid a man devoured by suspicion. Every smile was a sneer in disguise, every handclasp a trap. He cultivated allies, then discarded them when danger loomed. In 1807, the so-called Escorial conspiracy sought to overthrow Charles IV and Godoy, replacing them with Ferdinand. When exposed, Ferdinand collapsed in terror. He confessed, begged forgiveness, and betrayed his co-conspirators by handing over their names. Those who imagined him a savior found themselves disgraced, imprisoned, exiled. This was no isolated act, but the beginning of a lifelong pattern, using men as shields, feeding his survival with their ruin. The court never forgot this cowardice. For Ferdinand, betrayal was not shameful but necessary. To Spain, it was a warning of the king he would become, one whose survival mattered more than loyalty, principle, or future. The following year, Spain's weakness caught Napoleon's eye. Master of France, conqueror of Europe, he saw a decaying empire ripe for seizure. In 1808, he summoned the royal family to Bayonne, under the guise of negotiation. What unfolded was humiliation. In a series of coerced abdications, Charles IV renounced the throne, Ferdinand briefly claimed it, and both were stripped of it. Napoleon installed his brother Joseph as King of Spain, a dynastic theft in broad daylight, Spain's crown reduced to a plaything of French ambition. Ferdinand, hailed as a savior, surrendered his birthright not with defiance but confusion and fear. The impact was catastrophic. In Madrid, news of the abdication sparked outrage. On May 2, 1808, the people rose in revolt against French occupation. The de Mayo Uprising left streets choked with corpses. Men, women, even children took up knives and stones against Napoleon's soldiers. The response was merciless. Executions followed. Firing squads lined civilians against walls, and Madrid's air reeked of powder and blood. Francisco Goya immortalized the horror in the 3rd of May. Thus began the Spanish War of Independence, a brutal 6-year struggle draining both Spain and France. Guerrilla fighters, a word born from this war, rose from villages, striking columns before vanishing into hills. The French retaliated with massacres, torching towns, hanging peasants from trees as warnings. Spain became a charnel house where villages turned to ash. While his subjects endured, Ferdinand languished in French captivity. Confined at the Château de Valençay, he lived in gilded imprisonment, outwardly honored but powerless. His people bled and starved, yet their king did not lead them. He waited, writing self-pitying letters to Napoleon, dreaming not of Spain's freedom but his restoration. Even as guerrilla fighters carved legends of resistance, Ferdinand remained absent from the struggle defining his nation. Whispers claimed French physicians examined him, noting deformities or instability. These tales, perhaps exaggerated by hatred, endure. What cannot be denied, captivity did nothing to strengthen him. While Spain hardened into survival, Ferdinand grew softer, more paranoid, consumed by obsessions. By 1812, Spanish liberals gathered in Cádiz to draft a constitution that would modernize the kingdom. This beacon of liberty, limiting royal power and affirming representation, was among the most advanced of its age. Written under occupation, it promised rebirth. Yet when Ferdinand returned in 1814 after Napoleon's defeat, he crushed it without hesitation. Across Spain, people hailed him with tears of joy. Priests raised relics. Women kissed the earth. To them he was still El Deseado, the king restored by providence. Yet this savior was no liberator. He dismissed the Constitution as heresy, restored absolute monarchy, and punished those who had fought for freedom. Prisons filled with generals and intellectuals, thousands fled into exile. The Inquisition, thought extinguished, flickered back to life. Ferdinand had returned not as desired one, but as El Rey Felón, the treacherous king. From that moment, Spain's promise curdled into tragedy. The ominous decade unfolded beneath Ferdinand's shadow. Spain, weary from war, yearned for healing, but the king's hand brought only repression. The Constitution of Cádiz, written in blood, lay in ashes. In its place rose an old order cloaked in suspicion. Ferdinand treated his throne not as a trust from his people, but as a fortress to defend against them. Ministers were chosen for loyalty, not wisdom. His court became a maze of spies, each watching the other, each reporting whispers to the king. The prisons of Madrid and Seville overflowed. Men who had fought valiantly against the French rotted in cells, their crime not treason but liberal thought. Priests who had blessed guerrilla fighters were silenced. Teachers who spoke of new ideas disappeared. Families fled into exile, their names erased from records. Even in the countryside, farmers muttered in fear, for the Inquisition, abolished by Napoleon, was partially restored under Ferdinand. It no longer burned heretics, but it censored books, crushed thought, and chained Spain to the past. Yet Ferdinand's tyranny was not born of politics alone. It was fueled by private torments whispered in palace corners. His marriages, each a tragedy, became the substance of gossip and hatred. His first wife, Maria Antonia of Naples, entered Madrid a hopeful bride. Innocent and pious, she could not endure Ferdinand's household. Whispers spread that their union required strange contraptions, humiliating devices, that her screams echoed in palace halls. Others claimed poison, perhaps by Ferdinand or his mother. Historians argue she was frail from the start, addicted to laudanum, and died at 21 of natural illness. Yet gossip mattered more than fact. The image of a bride broken by her marriage deepened Ferdinand's legend of cruelty. Maria Isabel of Portugal, his second queen, fared no better. Greeted with optimism, she was dead within 2 years. Some blamed childbirth, others Ferdinand's demands. The truth is uncertain, but her death left another scar on the monarchy. Maria Josefa of Saxony endured longest. She treated marriage as procedure, conjugal nights arranged like surgeries. One child lived only hours, and she herself followed years later, worn down by illness and despair. Rumors spread that her bedchamber resembled a workshop of torment. Historians warn of exaggeration, but 3 queens entered his chambers, and 3 died young. By the time Ferdinand married Maria Christina of Naples in 1829, Spain was already broken. Maria Christina, pragmatic and strong, gave birth to Isabella, who would inherit the crown. Yet even she lived under suffocating suspicion, spied upon, and doubted. While queens faded, Spain itself collapsed. Across the Atlantic, rebellion flared. Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Peru, Chile. Colonies that had once poured silver and gold into Spain's coffers broke free. Ferdinand raged, but his rage was impotent. He sent no armies capable of reconquest, only decrees and threats. The empire slipped away, and with it the wealth that had sustained centuries of monarchy. By the early 1830s, Spain's global dominion was reduced to fragments. The people felt ruin in their bones. Famine spread in the countryside, coinage lost its value, bandits roamed the roads. The peasants who had once wept at the king's return now cursed his name. Revolution simmered in cities, whispered in taverns, written in pamphlets smuggled across borders. Ferdinand's police hunted dissenters, but the fire of rebellion smoldered, waiting for his death to erupt. Foreign observers mocked Spain. Britain and France spoke of her as a relic, a corpse animated by a mad king. Diplomats described Madrid as a court of shadows, ministers trembling, the king shuffling between chambers of mirrors, convinced of plots that did not exist. Even allies grew wary. Once Spain had ruled half the known world. Now she was pitied, her fate chained to a monarch who had become her greatest liability. As years passed, Ferdinand grew heavier, more infirm. His body bloated with illness. His face sagged, his skin broke in sores no physician could soothe. He was carried in a sedan chair through his palace, glaring at courtiers as though each plotted his downfall. El Deseado had become a husk, half mad, drowning in suspicion. The nation reflected his sickness. The treasury was empty, the army demoralized, the navy almost gone. Banditry plagued the countryside, cities seethed with unrest. Ferdinand obsessed not with reform but succession. He had no son, only Isabella. His brother Don Carlos rejected her claim, insisting only a male heir could rule. In desperation, Ferdinand issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, allowing his daughter to inherit. It was an act born not of principle but necessity, and it divided the kingdom. Nobles, soldiers, priests took sides, preparing for the war his death would unleash. The palace atmosphere grew suffocating. Whispers filled corridors. Courtiers swore loyalty by day but plotted at night. Maria Christina, queen and regent in waiting, shielded Isabella while placating factions circling like wolves. She moved through the palace with serene mask, though in private she confessed despair, calling her life a play before hostile eyes. Ferdinand's paranoia reached grotesque proportions. He ordered food tasters to wait half an hour after sampling his meals, fearing poison. He burst into his queen's chamber with guards at night, demanding proof of loyalty. He stared for hours at Isabella, searching for resemblance, convinced she carried another man's blood. Physicians noted scars on his body, suggesting self-inflicted attempts to cure imagined afflictions. By 1832, his health collapsed. Gout ravaged him, leaving limbs swollen and useless. He raved in delirium, called for long-dead wives, muttered conspiracies, issued contradictory commands. Ministers dared not act, for any decision might earn his wrath in the next lucid moment. Spain drifted like a ship without helm, her course only toward disaster. Ferdinand's body was failing, but his paranoia never eased. Tremors shook his hands, his words slurred, and his eyes grew clouded. He summoned priests at all hours, begging forgiveness for sins real and imagined. He accused loyal servants of treason, dismissed ministers without cause, and raved of conspiracies that existed only in his mind. Guards rotated constantly, food was tested obsessively, and Maria Christina lived like a prisoner in her own chambers. Letters she wrote to her family describe a life in a glass cage, visible at all times, every breath observed, every word weighed. The palace itself became a theater of fear. Courtiers learned to walk with downcast eyes, to speak in riddles, to never reveal joy or sorrow, lest it be twisted into evidence of treachery. Servants disappeared without explanation. Celebrations that once rang with music fell silent, replaced by cautious murmurs. Madrid's court, once vibrant with intrigue and ambition, resembled a tomb haunted by suspicion. Beyond the palace walls, Spain withered. The empire had collapsed, its colonies gone. The treasury was empty, famine stalked the countryside, and unrest filled the cities. Foreign diplomats reported with scorn, calling Madrid a madhouse ruled by a king unfit to bear the weight of a crown. Britain and France treated Spain as a relic, a fallen empire no longer feared. Even Rome, once deferential, whispered that Ferdinand's reign was divine punishment for Spain's pride. In September 1833, the king's long decline reached its end. His body, bloated with gout and exhaustion, lay still in the palace where he had caused so much dread. Priests whispered prayers as incense clouded the air. Courtiers filed through, their faces arranged in grief, but in their hearts, many felt only relief. Officially, he died of gout and illness. Unofficially, whispers said he was consumed by his deformities of spirit, a monarch who had wasted away in paranoia. He was 49 years old. His death did not bring peace. Instead, the pragmatic sanction he had issued was tested at once. His daughter Isabella, barely 3 years old, was proclaimed queen under the regency of Maria Christina. But Ferdinand's brother Don Carlos refused to accept her. Within months, Spain erupted into civil war. The First Carlist War drenched the land in blood, as brothers fought brothers, villages burned, and fields were sown with corpses. It was Ferdinand's final gift to his people, not stability, but war. Across Europe, his passing was greeted with contempt. Diplomats in London, Paris, and Vienna wrote of him as one of the worst monarchs of his age, a king who ruled by suspicion and destroyed what others built with sacrifice. Historians called him a relic of absolutism, proof that monarchy without reform was doomed. Among Spaniards, memories were divided. Some still remembered him as El Deseado, the desired one, the king they had once awaited with hope. Others cursed him as El Rey Felón, the treacherous king. For most, he became a figure of tragedy, not reverence, a monarch who betrayed them in war and in peace, who left their children to fight in his shadow. The myths clung to him long after. Whispers of grotesque deformities, of tortured queens, of preserved remains hidden in Vatican vaults, all became part of his legend. Historians remind us much of this was gossip, yet the persistence of the tales reveals the fear he inspired. In the end, it mattered less what was true than what people believed. To them, Ferdinand was grotesque in body and spirit alike, and his reign a wound that scarred Spain. Spain emerged weaker than ever. Once master of continents, she was now fractured and humiliated, consumed by civil war. The empire was gone, the treasury bare, and her people left to pay the price of one man's insecurities. Ferdinand had sought to be remembered as the desired one. History remembers him instead as the paranoid king who doomed an empire. If a kingdom reflects the soul of its ruler, then Spain in Ferdinand's age was a mirror of dread. Her streets were hungry, her palaces filled with whispers, her throne a stage for cruelty and fear. And the question that lingers, like a whisper in the corridors of the Escorial, is whether Spain's tragedy was his alone, or whether it was the curse of monarchy itself, where the fate of millions rested on the frailties of one flawed man.